Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. Ethan Clarke never imagined he'd marry someone from another species. As a xenobiologist stationed on the diplomatic hub of Ian Station, interspecies relations were part of his daily life, but Lyra was different. The Ezoran diplomat captured his heart with her radiant, bioluminescent skin and her soft-spoken voice that echoed in his mind telepathically. They married 3 years ago, symbolizing a union of Earth and Ezora. Their marriage had always been strong, built on mutual respect and fascination with each other's worlds. But lately Ethan couldn't ignore the growing distance. Lyra had become secretive. She spent more time attending classified diplomatic meetings, her responses to Ethan's questions curt and dismissive. When she started wearing a peculiar bracelet, beaded with polished, distinctly Earth-made stones, Ethan's curiosity turned into suspicion. Ezorans didn't wear jewelry. It was on a Tuesday evening when Ethan found the first clue. Lyra was in the shower, her bracelet left on the bedside table. Ethan rarely invaded her privacy, but something about the object pulled him. The beads were engraved with symbols that looked oddly like old Earth constellations. As he turned the bracelet in his hands, his implant buzzed with a notification. A message from Lyra's tablet flashed onto the room's holoscreen. "Meet tonight. Same place. Bring him." The message was encrypted, but Ethan's heart raced. It was sent to someone named Jackson Reed. "Who's Jackson?" he muttered, placing the bracelet back. That night, Lyra left their apartment wearing a formal diplomatic robe. Her excuse was vague and Ethan didn't press. He needed to know the truth on his own. Ethan's work in xenobiology granted him access to the station's security network. He bypassed a few protocols and traced Lyra's movements through public surveillance. She headed to the lower levels of Ian Station, a sector populated mainly by humans and a few alien traders. He followed discreetly, his heart pounding. The air in the lower levels was damp, a stark contrast to the sterile atmosphere of the upper diplomatic quarters. He slipped through the dimly lit corridors until he saw her. Lyra stood in a secluded booth at a human-owned cafe, her bioluminescent glow muted under a hood. Across from her sat a human man, tall, broad-shouldered, and entirely too familiar. Ethan's stomach dropped. Jackson Reed was a former military officer turned freelance diplomat. Known for his charm and questionable morals, he wasn't the type Ethan expected Lyra to associate with, let alone meet in secret. The conversation between them was muffled, but Ethan activated the audio enhancement on his watch. "You're sure he's ready?" Lyra's voice came through, cold and calculated. "More than ready," Jackson replied, smirking. "Humans will take to the idea faster than you think." Lyra leaned closer, her telepathic glow flickering slightly. "If Ethan finds out, it could jeopardize everything." "He's loyal." "Too loyal maybe," Jackson quipped. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Was this an affair? Or something worse? He debated confronting them then and there but decided against it. Instead he quietly retreated. Back in their apartment, Lyra returned late, her glow subdued. Ethan pretended to be asleep but his mind raced. The woman he thought he knew was hiding something monumental, and the cryptic clues pointed to a betrayal not just of their marriage but of something far greater. As Ethan stared at the ceiling, he resolved to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Ethan's mind was a storm of unanswered questions and gnawing doubts. The conversation between Lyra and Jackson played on a loop in his head, each word twisting the knife deeper. Who was Jackson to her? What plan were they orchestrating behind his back? And what did she mean by saying Ethan was too loyal? The next morning, Ethan waited until Lyra left for another diplomatic meeting. Her movements were almost predictable now, calculated and deliberate. Ethan knew this was his opportunity to dig deeper. He opened his holo terminal and began searching for anything that could link Jackson Reed to Lyra's recent behavior. Jackson had a reputation as a rogue diplomat, but finding concrete records of his activities was like trying to catch smoke. His official profiles were pristine, but Ethan's network access as a xenobiologist allowed him to dig beneath the surface. Jackson had ties to a number of private research groups specializing in xenogenetics, the study of combining alien and human DNA. Ethan's pulse quickened as he discovered that one of those groups, Aurora Labs, operated discreetly on Ian Station. He leaned back in his chair, piecing the puzzle together. Aurora Labs had been under scrutiny years ago for rumors of unethical experimentation, but no charges were ever proven. Could Lyra be working with Jackson and Aurora Labs on something similar? Ethan couldn't shake the memory of her cryptic words, the greater good of humanity and Ezora. The pieces began to fall into place, but he needed more evidence. He downloaded all the information he could find on Aurora Labs and Jackson's known associates, encrypting it under multiple layers of security. His next step would require a more direct approach. That evening, Ethan followed Lyra again. She returned to the lower levels of Ian Station, but this time she didn't stop at the cafe. She entered a private research facility nestled behind an unmarked door. Ethan's heart pounded as he approached the building. A small hollow panel beside the door displayed a warning. Authorized personnel only. Trespassing is prohibited. Ethan hesitated. Breaking into a private research facility wasn't just unethical, it was dangerous. But the thought of Lyra working with Jackson on something sinister spurred him forward. Using his ID badge and a few tricks he'd learned in his years as a researcher, Ethan bypassed the initial security scan. The door slid open with a soft hiss and he slipped inside. The facility was dimly lit, its corridors lined with opaque glass panels that concealed whatever experiments were being conducted inside. Ethan moved quickly, relying on the faint hum of machinery to mask his footsteps. His watch vibrated, alerting him to an encrypted signal nearby. Following the signal, he found a central terminal in an empty lab. He connected his watch and began decrypting the files. The documents he uncovered made his blood run cold. The facility was conducting hybridization experiments, blending Ezoran and human DNA to create a new form of life. The files referenced Project Unison, a joint initiative to bridge the genetic gap between species. Lyra's name appeared in several reports, listed as a primary contributor. Ethan's chest tightened. He scrolled further, finding video logs of experiments. The images that played before him were both fascinating and horrifying. Test subjects, both human and Ezoran, subjected to invasive procedures to merge their genetic material. One file stopped him in his tracks. It was labeled Hybrid Success, Phase 1. The footage showed a human subject glowing faintly, their skin pulsing with the same bioluminescence as Lyra's. They were speaking, no, telepathically communicating with an unseen figure. Ethan felt a mix of awe and revulsion. This was groundbreaking science, but at what cost? A noise behind him jolted him back to reality. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. He quickly disconnected his watch and ducked behind a console as the door slid open. Lyra entered, her hood pulled back, revealing her glowing skin. Behind her was Jackson Reed. "I told you we need more time," Lyra said, her voice sharp. Jackson chuckled. "Time is a luxury we don't have. The human factions are already suspicious. If we don't show results soon, this alliance falls apart." Lyra sighed, her glow dimming slightly. "This isn't just about politics, Jackson. This is about survival, for both our species." "You keep saying that, but what happens when your husband finds out? You think he'll just accept this?" Ethan's heart clenched. Lyra's voice softened. "Ethan wouldn't understand, not yet. But he's stronger than you think." "Maybe," Jackson said, leaning against the console Ethan was hiding behind. "Or maybe he's just another obstacle we'll have to deal with." Ethan's fists clenched. He wanted to leap out and confront them, but the weight of what he'd discovered held him back. He needed to know more. Lyra stepped toward the terminal, accessing the same files Ethan had just decrypted. "The next phase begins tomorrow. Make sure everything is ready." Jackson smirked. "Consider it done." As they left, Ethan slipped out of the lab, his mind racing. Lyra wasn't just cheating, she was leading a project that could alter the future of both humanity and the Ezorans. But why had she kept him in the dark? Back in their apartment, Lyra was already asleep when Ethan returned. He sat in the darkness, his thoughts swirling. Was Lyra a traitor? Or was she truly trying to save both their worlds? The weight of the truth pressed down on him. Whatever her reasons, Ethan knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He had to confront her, and Jackson, before it was too late. Ethan couldn't wait any longer. The moment Lyra stirred awake the next morning, he was already pacing in their small apartment, his thoughts a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and confusion. When she finally sat up, her bioluminescent glow soft in the dim light, she greeted him with a sleepy smile. "You're up early?" Ethan stopped pacing and turned to face her. "We need to talk, Lyra." Her smile faded as she noticed the tension in his voice. "What's wrong?" "I know about Project Unison," Ethan said, the words cutting through the air like a blade. Lyra froze. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the station's environmental systems. Then her glow flickered, a telltale sign of her inner turmoil. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, her voice low. "I followed you last night," Ethan admitted. "I saw you meeting with Jackson. I broke into the lab, Lyra. I saw the files. I know about the experiments, the hybrids, everything." Lyra stood slowly, her bioluminescence intensifying as she drew in a deep breath. You shouldn't have done that. Don't turn this on me. Ethan snapped. You've been lying to me for weeks, sneaking around with Jackson, working on some genetic experiment without telling me. And now I find out it involves merging human and Ezoran DNA? What the hell is going on, Lyra? She stared at him, her luminous eyes searching his face. Finally, she sighed and gestured for him to sit. You're right, she said, her voice calm but heavy with emotion. I've been keeping things from you. But it wasn't out of malice, Ethan. It was to protect you. Protect me from what? He demanded, refusing to sit. From the truth. Lyra paused, her glow dimming as she gathered her thoughts. The Ezoran Council initiated Project Unison as a last resort. Decades ago, our scientists discovered a disturbing trend. Our species is slowly losing the ability to reproduce. Genetic diversity among Ezorans is dwindling, and if we don't act, we'll face extinction within a few generations. Ethan's anger wavered as he processed her words. What does that have to do with humans? Lyra met his gaze, her expression somber. Humans are the only species we've encountered with compatible genetics. Your adaptability, your resilience, it's remarkable. By combining our DNA, we hope to create a new hybrid species that can carry the best traits of both our people. It's not just about survival, Ethan, it's about evolution. Ethan felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. The science was extraordinary, but the implications were staggering. And you didn't think I deserved to know this? I wanted to tell you, Lyra said, stepping closer. But the council forbade it. They feared the backlash if humans found out. And I was afraid of how you'd react. You're my husband, Ethan. I didn't want to lose you. He shook his head, his mind racing. You were creating hybrids without anyone's consent. Do these people even know what's being done to them? Lyra flinched. The early experiments were not as ethical as I would have liked. That's one of the reasons I joined the project, to ensure it was done right. The current subjects are volunteers, fully informed of the risks and potential outcomes. And Jackson? Ethan asked, his voice sharp. What's his role in all this? Lyra hesitated. Jackson is an ally but also a liability. He's helping us navigate human politics, but he's more interested in the power this project could bring than in its scientific or moral implications. I don't trust him, but I need him, for now. Ethan's stomach churned. And what about me? Was I just another pawn in your plan? Lyra's glow brightened as she reached for his hand. Ethan, no. I married you because I love you. You've given me hope, strength, and a reason to fight for a future where our species can coexist. Everything I've done has been to protect that future, for us. Ethan pulled his hand away, conflicted. Her words rang true, but the betrayal still stung. You should have told me, Lyra. I could have helped you. Instead, you shut me out and worked with someone like Jackson behind my back. I know, she said, her voice trembling. And I'm sorry. But now that you know the truth, I need your help. The next phase of the project begins today, and there's a lot at stake. Ethan frowned. What's the next phase? Lyra hesitated, then took a deep breath. The council wants to present the first successful hybrid to both Ezoran and human leaders. It's a gesture of unity, proof that our species can thrive together. But there are factions on both sides who will do anything to stop this. Jackson has been receiving threats, and I fear someone on the inside is working against us. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He'd spent years studying alien biology and working alongside researchers from dozens of species. If anyone could navigate the complexities of this situation, it was him. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice steady. Relief flickered across Lyra's face. I need you to help me protect the hybrid during the presentation. If anything goes wrong, everything we've worked for could be destroyed. Ethan nodded, though his mind was still reeling. He wasn't sure he trusted Lyra completely, but he couldn't ignore the gravity of what she was trying to achieve. All right, he said. But if we're doing this, I need full transparency. No more secrets, Lyra. She placed a hand on his chest, her glow warm and soothing. I promise, Ethan. No more secrets. As they prepared to leave, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Project Unison was a bold and risky endeavor, and it had enemies lurking in the shadows. For better or worse, he was now part of it, and he'd do whatever it took to ensure the truth came to light. The presentation of the first successful hybrid was set to take place in the Nexus Hall, a sprawling high-security chamber on Ian Station where diplomats, scientists, and military leaders from both Earth and Ezora convened for high-stakes negotiations. Lyra had spent the morning briefing Ethan on the protocols and security measures, but the tension between them was palpable. Ethan had agreed to help, but his unease lingered. The hybrid, referred to in the files as Subject Alpha, was an extraordinary achievement, the first of its kind. Yet, the moral and political implications weighed heavily on his mind. As they arrived at the Nexus Hall, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Uniformed guards patrolled the perimeter, scientists scurried between stations, and delegates gathered in clusters, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "Stay close," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the room. Among the attendees he spotted Jackson Reed, leaning casually against a pillar with his trademark smirk. Their eyes met and Jackson raised a mocking salute. "Of course he's here," Ethan muttered. Lyra touched his arm. "Ignore him. Focus on what matters." A loud chime silenced the crowd, and the central platform lit up. An Ezoran elder, her bioluminescence pulsing in rhythmic waves, stepped forward to address the audience. "Today, we witness a moment of profound significance," the elder began, her telepathic voice echoing in every mind. "Project Unison represents not just the merging of our genetics, but the merging of our destinies." Ethan couldn't help but notice the skeptical glances exchanged among the human delegates. Even among the Ezorans, there were flickers of doubt in their glowing patterns. As the elder spoke, a reinforced glass chamber was wheeled onto the platform, housing the hybrid. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the chamber's lights illuminated the figure inside. Subject Alpha was a young woman, her features a harmonious blend of human and Ezoran traits. Her skin shimmered faintly with bioluminescent patterns, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity. She stood tall and calm, radiating a quiet strength. Ethan felt a mix of awe and unease. The hybrid was undeniably beautiful, but the ethical questions surrounding her creation lingered in his mind. As the elder continued her speech, Ethan's watch vibrated with a warning. He glanced down to see a message from Lyra's encrypted channel. "Possible threat detected. Be alert." Ethan's stomach tightened. He scanned the room again, this time looking for anything out of place. His eyes locked onto a man near the back of the hall, dressed in a maintenance uniform. The man's posture was tense, his hand hovering near his waist. "Lyra," Ethan whispered, nudging her. "I think we've got a problem." She followed his gaze, her glow dimming as she processed the situation. "I see him. Stay here." Before Ethan could protest, Lyra moved swiftly through the crowd, her diplomatic badge granting her access to restricted areas. Ethan clenched his fists, fighting the urge to follow her. On the platform, the presentation continued. Subject Alpha stepped out of the chamber, her movements fluid and deliberate. The crowd murmured in awe as she extended her hands, her bioluminescence intensifying. A faint telepathic wave emanated from her, a gesture of peace. But the moment was shattered by a sudden explosion. The blast rocked the hall, sending shockwaves through the crowd. Smoke and debris filled the air as people screamed and scrambled for cover. "Ethan?" Lyra's voice echoed in his mind. He turned to see her rushing toward him, her glow bright and urgent. "We have to get to Alpha." Through the chaos, Ethan spotted the man in the maintenance uniform moving toward the platform, a small device clutched in his hand. Without thinking, Ethan sprinted after him. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice lost in the commotion. The man turned, his face twisted with determination. He activated the device, and a second explosion erupted near the platform, shattering the hybrid's protective chamber. Alpha staggered, her glowing patterns flickering erratically. Ethan reached the man and tackled him to the ground, wresting the device from his grasp. "You don't understand," the man snarled. "They're lying to us. This project will destroy humanity." Ethan hesitated, his grip tightening on the device. The man's words echoed his own doubts, but the destruction he'd caused was undeniable. Before Ethan could respond, Lyra appeared, her bioluminescence flaring with intensity. She touched the man's temple and he went limp, his body collapsing to the ground. "We don't have time for this," she said, pulling Ethan to his feet. "We need to get Alpha out of here." The hybrid was struggling to stand, her luminous patterns dimming as she clutched her side. Ethan and Lyra reached her just as another explosion rocked the hall, this time near the entrance. "Go," Lyra urged, guiding Alpha toward an emergency exit. As they escaped into the station's maintenance tunnels, Ethan's mind raced. The man's words had planted a seed of doubt. What if Project Unison wasn't as noble as Lyra claimed? What if it truly posed a threat to humanity? When they reached a secure room, Lyra sealed the door and turned to Ethan. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice heavy with concern. He nodded, though his thoughts were far from settled. Who was that man? And how did he know about the project? Lyra's glow dimmed. I don't know. But there are factions on both sides who want to see this alliance fail. We need to find out who's behind this. Ethan glanced at Alpha, who was watching them with a mixture of fear and determination. Despite her injuries, there was a strength in her gaze that reminded him of Lyra. We also need to make sure she's safe, he said. Lyra nodded. Agreed. But this isn't over, Ethan. Whoever planned this attack won't stop until they've destroyed everything we've worked for. Ethan's resolve hardened. He didn't trust the project entirely, but he couldn't ignore the stakes. The future of two species hung in the balance, and he was now deeply entwined in the fight to protect it. The secure room was silent except for the steady hum of the station's ventilation system. Lyra paced back and forth, her glow flickering with anxiety. Alpha sat on a metal bench in the corner, her luminous skin barely visible in the dim light, eyes cast downward. Ethan leaned against the wall, his thoughts swirling with questions and doubts. The attack on the Nexus Hall had been a wake-up call. Someone, or several someones, wanted to derail Project Unison, and the conspiracy ran deeper than he'd imagined. Who do we trust, Lyra? Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice harsh. Jackson? The Council? This whole project feels like a powder keg ready to explode. Lyra paused, her gaze hardening. I know, Ethan. I'm just as lost as you are. But we don't have time to figure everything out. We need to find out who's pulling the strings before they can strike again. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. The man who tried to sabotage the presentation, he knew exactly where to strike. He knew about Alpha. That wasn't just some random act of terrorism. Someone on the inside gave him information. Lyra nodded grimly. I've been thinking the same thing. It wasn't a coincidence. She turned to Alpha, her voice softening. Can you tell us anything? Anything about what happened? About why they attacked you? Alpha's bioluminescence dimmed further, as though the hybrid was struggling with the question itself. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but strong. I don't know everything. But I know they want to stop us. They fear the hybrid species we will create. She paused, looking between Lyra and Ethan. The humans don't understand what we're trying to do. And the Azorans, they fear the changes this could bring. Ethan frowned, leaning in. What changes? What are you saying, Alpha? I'm not like other hybrids, Alpha said, her voice soft but steady. I have abilities that even the Azorans did not anticipate. My mind is stronger. I can connect with others, not just telepathically but with feelings, memories. I can see things in them that they can't even understand themselves. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling slightly. It's not just about survival. It's about transformation. Lyra's eyes widened in shock, but Ethan's gut clenched with unease. The implications of Alpha's words were staggering. If the hybrids were evolving beyond anything the Azorans had anticipated, it meant the project's scope was far greater than he'd realized. We need to get to the heart of this, Ethan said, his voice firm. We need to know who's really behind all of this. And we need to stop them before it's too late. Lyra nodded. I have an idea. There's a confidential database at the Central Azoran Embassy. It's heavily guarded, but if we can access it, we might find the names of the people backing this sabotage. We might even find out who's funding the rogue factions working against us. Ethan looked at her, skepticism in his eyes. You think we can just waltz into the embassy and hack into their database? She smiled faintly. I didn't say it would be easy. But I've worked with their security systems before. With the right tools and a little bit of help, we can get in. And if we get caught? Ethan asked. Lyra's eyes darkened. Then we'll be in more trouble than we can handle. That's reassuring, Ethan muttered. Alpha, who had been listening intently, stood up, her gaze sharp. I will help. I can get past their guards. My abilities can confuse their minds, make them see things that aren't there. She glanced at Lyra. I can do it without hurting them. But it will take time. They'll know something's wrong if I try to do it too fast. Lyra considered this, her eyes narrowed. It's risky. But it might be our only option. Let's do it, Ethan said, his voice resolute. We can't keep hiding. We need answers. The plan was set into motion within the hour. Ethan, Lyra, and Alpha made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of Ian Station, avoiding the usual security checkpoints. Lyra's access codes allowed them to bypass most of the barriers, but they had to rely on Alpha's abilities to make sure no one caught on to their movements. As they neared the Azoran Embassy's perimeter, Lyra stopped and turned to Ethan. Once we get inside, we'll have a limited window to access the database. We'll need to be fast and precise. Got it, Ethan said. Let's just hope no one's watching us. They slipped into an air vent and crawled through the ducts, emerging near a small maintenance access door that led directly into the embassy's secure section. Alpha used her abilities to cloud the minds of the nearby guards, who briefly faltered in their movements before returning to their posts with no recollection of having seen anything amiss. It was eerie how easily Alpha manipulated their perceptions. Ethan couldn't help but feel a chill crawl down his spine as they moved deeper into the building. Once inside, they made their way to the central data hub. It was located in a heavily secured area, but Lyra had already hacked into the system's basic security protocols. It was clear she'd done this before, and her hands moved swiftly across the terminal, bypassing the encryption like it was child's play. Just a few more seconds, she murmured, her fingers flying over the holographic keyboard. Ethan kept his eyes on the door. They weren't out of the woods yet. Suddenly, Alpha stiffened, her eyes wide. "They know," she whispered. "They found us." Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he looked toward the entrance. Sure enough, 2 guards appeared in the corridor, moving in their direction. "We don't have time," Lyra hissed. "We need that data now." Ethan glanced at Alpha. "Can you hold them off?" Alpha's glow flared as she nodded. "I can delay them. But you must hurry." Lyra gave Ethan a sharp look, then turned back to the terminal. "I've got it. I found the files." She downloaded a series of encrypted files into a data chip and slipped it into Ethan's pocket. "This should have everything we need. Now let's get out of here." As they made their way back to the maintenance ducts, Alpha's abilities flickered. She was pushing herself too hard, trying to keep the guards' minds clouded long enough for them to escape. But the strain was evident in her movements, and Ethan could tell she was weakening. "We're almost there," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Stay with us, Alpha." With a final burst of effort, Alpha collapsed to the ground, her glow dimming as the guards began to recover from her mental manipulation. Lyra immediately knelt beside her. "Alpha, we can't stay here," Ethan said urgently. "We need to move." But Alpha's voice was barely a whisper. I've done all I can." Before Ethan could respond, a loud explosion echoed through the station, shaking the walls. "Move now," Lyra shouted, pulling Alpha to her feet. The explosion was a diversion, one that would buy them only minutes before the station's security forces would descend on them. They had the files. Now they just needed to survive long enough to make sense of the truth. The explosion had rocked Ian Station, but in the chaos that followed, Ethan, Lyra, and Alpha managed to slip through the cracks. They navigated through the darkened corridors, the urgency in their movements only heightened by the blaring alarms echoing through the station's loudspeakers. Ethan's mind raced as he clutched the data chip in his pocket, knowing the truth of what lay inside could change everything. "How much longer?" Ethan asked, his breath shallow as he glanced back toward the distant sounds of pursuing security. "We need to find somewhere to lay low." Lyra, who was guiding them through the maze of maintenance tunnels, paused and turned back to him, her eyes dark with concern. "Just a few more minutes? We're almost there." Alpha, who had been silent since the explosion, moved beside them, her usual composed demeanor now visibly shaken. Her bioluminescence flickered weakly, but she kept her pace steady. It's not over, is it?" Alpha asked, her voice strained. "The danger, the project, everything we've worked for. I don't think it's just about fear anymore." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He had once thought of Alpha as a symbol of hope, a bridge between two species, but now the weight of what they were involved in was becoming unbearably clear. "No," Lyra replied, her voice tight with resolve. "This is only the beginning. We're not just fighting rogue elements now. We're fighting an entire system." The data chip burned a hole in Ethan's pocket, and the cold reality of their situation began to settle in. This wasn't just a matter of sabotage or fear anymore, it was a matter of survival and potentially, of betrayal. They reached a secure storage room on the outer edge of the station, far from the public eye. Lyra entered a series of codes into the terminal, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, there was nothing but a few crates and a terminal for access to the station's external communication network. Lyra gestured for Ethan and Alpha to enter. "This is the safest place we can get to right now. We have to decrypt the files." Ethan stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. He was hyper-aware now, the sounds of the station's systems humming all around them. The tension was unbearable. "Alpha, you should sit down," Lyra suggested, her voice softening as she approached the hybrid. "You've pushed yourself too hard. Let me help you." Alpha shook her head slowly. "I can't rest. Not now. I need to know what's happening. I need to understand what they're doing to us." Lyra didn't argue. She moved to the terminal and began plugging in the data chip. The screen blinked to life, showing lines of encrypted files and complex security layers. "This will take a while," Lyra muttered, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. "But we have no choice. We need to know exactly what we're up against." As Lyra worked, Ethan walked over to the small window that overlooked the station's sprawling network of docks and ships. His thoughts were heavy with the implications of what they'd just uncovered. Suddenly, Alpha's voice broke through the quiet. "I've been thinking about the words of the man who attacked us. He said they wanted to stop us. But I don't think he meant it the way we thought." Ethan turned, curious despite himself. "What do you mean?" Alpha's eyes glowed softly as she looked at him, her gaze distant. "It's not just about hybridization or mixing genes. It's about power. The Izorans, the humans, they all fear what the hybrids represent. A new order. A new way of life. They fear what we could become if we evolve beyond them." Ethan was silent for a long moment, the weight of Alpha's words settling over him like a shadow. Could it be possible that the attacks weren't just about stopping Project Unison, but about stopping the evolution of a new, more powerful race entirely? Lyra interrupted his thoughts. "I've got it," she said, her voice strained. She turned the terminal toward them, displaying a list of encrypted files. "These are the names of the people behind the sabotage. And these are the files on Project Unison's ultimate goal." Ethan stepped closer, scanning the screen. His eyes widened as he read through the names. Some were familiar, others were not. High-ranking officials, shadowy corporate figures, military leaders. But the real revelation came when Lyra accessed the deeper layers of the files. Project Unison wasn't just about creating hybrids, Lyra said, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and dread. It was about transforming humanity. The hybrids, us, are the next step in human evolution. But the Izorans and those in power on Earth are terrified of what that means. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. So the hybrids weren't just designed to help humanity. They were designed to surpass it? Exactly, Lyra replied grimly. And the people who have been sabotaging this project. Some of them are afraid that if the hybrids succeed they will lose control. They see us as a threat not just to their power but to everything they've built. Alpha's eyes flickered with pain as she processed the information. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about the balance of power. Ethan looked at her, his mind racing. We've got to expose this. We've got to make sure people understand what's really going on. That's not going to be easy, Lyra said, shaking her head. The conspiracy runs deep. If we reveal this, we'll be targets. The entire system will turn against us. But we have to try, Ethan said, his voice firm. The truth is bigger than all of us now. If we don't stop them, there won't be a future for anyone. Lyra met his gaze, her expression resolute. You're right. But exposing the truth comes at a cost. A shiver ran through Ethan as he realized what Lyra was hinting at. The cost of truth would be their lives. And it wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about choosing a side. We've come too far to back down now, Ethan said, his voice tight with determination. We'll fight. But we need help. We need to gather allies. Lyra's eyes softened. It won't be easy. But I know who we can turn to. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, a loud knock echoed through the door. Get down, Lyra hissed, pulling Ethan and Alpha into the shadows. The door opened slowly and a figure stepped into the room, Jackson Reed. You've made a mess of things, haven't you? Jackson's voice was smooth, almost mocking, but there was something in his eyes, something cold, that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Jackson, Lyra said, her voice calm but sharp. What are you doing here? He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. I'm here to clean up your mess. But I think you've underestimated just how deep this goes. It's not just about saving the hybrids anymore. You're in over your heads. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. They were no longer just fighting rogue factions. They were fighting an enemy within their own ranks. And the game had just changed. Part 7 Preview. With Jackson's true allegiances revealed, Ethan, Lyra, and Alpha must navigate a web of betrayal and deception. As their enemies close in, they must make an impossible choice. Expose the truth and risk everything, or join forces with the very forces they've been fighting against. In the end, the future of humanity and the Izorans will hinge on the choices they make, and the sacrifices they are willing to endure. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with uncertainty and the weight of unspoken truths. Jackson stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as Lyra, Ethan, and Alpha crouched in the shadows. Every nerve in Ethan's body screamed for action, but he knew better than to move rashly. They were caught in a web and Jackson held the strings. You think I don't know what you're doing? Jackson's voice was low, his tone dripping with cold amusement. You think I don't know what's in that chip you're holding? All this time, you've been playing your little game trying to figure out the truth, trying to save the hybrids. But you're all pawns. Don't you get it? Ethan's heart pounded as he slowly stood up from his hiding spot, his eyes never leaving Jackson. So, you knew all along? About the sabotage, about everything? Jackson's lips curled into a faint smile, but his eyes were hard. Of course. I've been playing both sides. I had to survive. You think this station is any different from Earth or the Zoran colonies? It's all about power, Ethan. Always has been. Always will be. Lyra stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. You've been working with them, haven't you? The ones trying to destroy Project Unison. Jackson's smile widened. It's not just about destroying the project. It's about control. The hybrids, the Zorans, the humans, none of you realize the bigger picture. None of you understand the scale of what's coming. Ethan's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? Jackson took a step forward, his hands clasped behind his back as if he were explaining some trivial matter. You think this is just about hybrids? That Project Unison was some misguided attempt to help humanity. But it wasn't. It was an experiment. A test to see how far humanity could evolve when given the right push. What the Zorans didn't realize, what you all don't realize, is that the hybrids were never meant to be the end result. They're just the beginning. Ethan's mind spun as the weight of Jackson's words settled on him. So, what's the real plan? What comes after the hybrids? Jackson's eyes gleamed with a dangerous excitement. A new order. A new species. One that will transcend both humans and Zorans. The hybrids, once they've fully evolved, will be able to manipulate genetic structures, fuse with other species and create something entirely new. Something no one on this station, no one in the galaxy will be able to control. Alpha stepped forward, her bioluminescence flickering with an intensity that matched her growing anger. You're talking about creating a race that's beyond all of us, a species that could overthrow entire civilizations. Jackson's smile deepened, his eyes almost gleaming with satisfaction. Exactly. And if you think the Zorans or humans will just sit back and let that happen, you're naive. That's why they're trying to stop you, Alpha. They fear you. They fear what you represent. But they don't understand. The evolution you represent isn't just biological. It's psychological. It's an evolution of consciousness. And once it's complete, there will be no stopping it. Lyra shook her head, her voice fierce. You're insane. You're willing to risk everything, millions of lives, for this twisted vision? Jackson turned toward her, his eyes cold and calculating. You think I'm the only one who wants this? The only one who believes in it? This station is just the beginning. Project Unison was just the first step, but we've already seen what the hybrids are capable of. They've evolved faster than anyone predicted. The next phase will be even more radical. It will be the birth of something completely new. Ethan's thoughts raced. And you think you can control it? You think you're the one who will steer this new race? Jackson's smile faltered for a brief moment. Of course. I've already aligned myself with those who see the potential. We have the resources, the power, and the means to ensure that this new order comes to pass. The hybrids will be our instruments. They'll be the foundation of something far greater than any one species. Alpha's voice trembled, but there was a steel edge to it. You're talking about genocide. You're talking about destroying everything we know, just to create something that you think is superior. Jackson shrugged, almost as if the concept of genocide were an insignificant afterthought. It's not about destruction. It's about evolution. If we don't push forward, we'll stagnate. We'll die. The universe isn't kind to those who stagnate. Ethan's stomach churned as he processed the enormity of Jackson's words. This wasn't just a political game, it wasn't about power or money. This was about the fundamental reshaping of life itself. The power to create and control life was now in their hands. But was it worth the cost? Was it worth risking everything for an uncertain future? We can't let you do this, Ethan said finally, his voice cold with resolve. This isn't evolution. It's madness. Lyra stepped closer to him, her eyes determined. Ethan's right. If we don't stop you now, the future will be beyond anything we can control. Jackson's eyes narrowed, his expression darkening. You think you can stop me? Do you really believe you can change the course of destiny? You're not the only ones with power, Ethan. And now you've crossed a line you can't uncross. Suddenly the air around them seemed to vibrate with tension. Alpha's body began to glow, brighter than it ever had before, and the room seemed to pulse with energy. If you want war, she said, her voice low and powerful, then I'll give you war. But I'll do it on my terms. Ethan's eyes widened as he watched Alpha's power surge. She was evolving, faster than anyone could have predicted. Before Jackson could react, Alpha raised her hands, and the room seemed to bend with her will. The energy around her intensified, crackling through the air. Jackson's eyes widened, a mix of awe and fear flickering across his face. "You think you can control this?" he spat, taking a step back. But Alpha didn't answer. She reached out toward the terminal, her glowing hands casting long, ghostly shadows on the walls as she tapped into the system's core, overriding the security protocols. The data began to flood the screen, encrypted files and hidden communications from high-ranking officials, detailing the full scope of the conspiracy. Jackson's plan was laid bare, the truth exposed. Ethan felt his heart race. "We have to broadcast this. Everyone has to know." Lyra didn't hesitate. She connected the terminal to the station's communications network, broadcasting the files to every corner of the galaxy. The truth was out now, there would be no hiding from it. Jackson lunged forward, his face twisted in fury. "You've ruined everything." But Alpha was faster. She unleashed a wave of energy that sent him crashing against the wall, his body convulsing with the shockwave. Ethan turned to Lyra. "We've done it. But now we have to survive this." The station was already in chaos. Security forces would be on their way, and they had no idea who they could trust anymore. But as the truth spread, as the entire galaxy became aware of the conspiracy, the power dynamic had already shifted. Jackson's plan was in the open, and it would be up to the people to decide what kind of future they wanted. As the three of them ran toward the escape route, Alpha's glow began to fade, the energy of her transformation subsiding. She looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with a strange mix of sadness and hope. "We may have won the battle," Alpha said softly, "but the war is far from over." Ethan nodded grimly. "We'll face it together." And with that, they ran into the unknown, knowing that their fight had only just begun. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the next phase of humanity's evolution was in their hands. And they would be ready for whatever came next. The void of space stretched before them, an infinite sea of stars that seemed so distant now, so cold. Yet within the darkness there was a flicker of light, hope. For the first time in what felt like ages, Ethan could almost believe that the galaxy had a future worth fighting for. But that belief came with a cost. They had barely escaped the station. Jackson's people were still hunting them, trying to cover their tracks, trying to erase the truth from existence. But the files they'd broadcasted were beyond containment now. The world knew. The entire galaxy had seen the corruption, the manipulation, the terrifying plans of those who had pulled the strings. The hybrid project, once seen as a hope for humanity's future, had now become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the pursuit of power. Ethan sat alone in a small, dimly lit room aboard the ship they had commandeered. The gentle hum of the engines was the only sound, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded in the past few days. He could still feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, the fear of their close calls, the weight of the knowledge they had uncovered. Beside him, Lyra sat at the controls, her fingers dancing over the interface as she plotted their next course. The data from the station was critical, but it was just the beginning. They still had so much to uncover, so many questions left unanswered. "Where do we go now?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and uncertainty. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her face pale from the long hours without rest. "I don't know," she admitted, her eyes haunted. "The data's out there. The galaxy knows what we found. But the question is, what will they do with it? Will they listen or will they choose to ignore it?" Alpha, who had been silent for the past few hours, looked up from where she had been meditating. Her pale skin glowed softly in the dim light, and her eyes, now more focused, more intense, met Ethan's gaze. "We may not have the luxury of waiting for answers," Alpha said, her voice soft but firm. "The war has only begun, Ethan. Those who sought to control us are not going to give up easily. We've exposed them, but they're still out there. And they will come for us." Ethan nodded, the weight of Alpha's words sinking in. He had known this fight wouldn't be easy. But now, with the truth out there, the danger felt more real than ever. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the future of all species, hybrid and otherwise. "Then we fight," Ethan said resolutely, the fire of determination igniting within him. "We can't let them win. If they want to take control, we'll show them that we have the power to stop them. We'll unite the others, humans, Izorans, hybrids. We're stronger together." Lyra gave him a tired but proud smile. "It's not just about fighting, Ethan. It's about showing the galaxy that we don't need to be controlled. We don't need to follow those who think they know what's best for us. We make our own future. Alpha stood, her lithe form casting long shadows in the low light. But to make that future we need allies. We need to reach out to those who have been kept in the dark. The ones who don't know what's been happening behind the scenes. We need to let them see what's at stake. Because this isn't just about the hybrids anymore. This is about the survival of every race, every species, that has ever felt the weight of oppression. Ethan stood pacing back and forth. The truth was finally out, but their fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. They had exposed a conspiracy that stretched across the stars, and now they had to face the consequences of their actions. The powerful figures who had engineered the hybrid project, the ones who feared Alpha and the others like her, would come after them with everything they had. And they would stop at nothing to erase the hybrids, to maintain their grip on power. Do you think the galaxy will believe us? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Will they even care? Or will they just let those in power sweep this under the rug? Lyra hesitated before answering. Some will believe. Some will fight alongside us. But there will be others, those who are too afraid, too entrenched in the old ways. But if we show them what we've learned, if we make them see the truth, they'll have no choice but to act. And if they don't? Alpha asked, her voice unwavering. If they choose to turn a blind eye to what's been happening? Then we'll have to force their hand, Ethan said firmly. We'll find the ones who are willing to fight for the future. We'll start a revolution. It won't be easy. But it's the only way to ensure that the mistakes of the past don't define the future. The silence that followed was heavy, but there was a sense of unity in the air. They were no longer just a group of rebels fighting for survival. They were a movement, a force to be reckoned with. And they knew what they had to do. Lyra spoke again, her voice calm but resolute. The first step is to reach out to these Orcs. They're not all on the side of the elites. There are factions among them that will understand what we're trying to do. We'll need their support if we're going to have any chance of taking down the system that has been built on lies. And the humans? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. Lyra smiled grimly. Humans are stubborn. But once they know the truth, once they understand what's really at stake, they'll join us. There are always those who will stand up for what's right. We'll find them. Alpha's glowing eyes narrowed as if calculating the many steps ahead. But we must be careful. The enemy is watching us. They know that we've uncovered the truth. We can't afford any more mistakes. Ethan nodded. We won't make any more mistakes. We'll build our army one person at a time. We'll spread the word, we'll show them the truth, and we'll bring down those who would use the hybrids to their own ends. The ship's comms suddenly crackled to life, interrupting their conversation. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the urgency was clear. Ethan, Lyra, Alpha, this is General Varric of the Ezoran Resistance. We've received your message. We're willing to talk. But we need to act fast. The humans and Ezorans in power are already making their move. We have only a small window before they close in on us. We need your help. Ethan's heart raced as he looked at the others. This was it. The first step toward uniting the galaxy. The first step toward changing everything. He turned to Lyra and Alpha, his voice full of conviction. Let's make sure we don't waste it. The ship's engines roared as they changed course, heading toward a future that was uncertain, but filled with possibility. The revolution had begun. And though the road ahead would be fraught with peril, they knew that they couldn't turn back. For the first time in a long time they had hope. And hope, in the face of oppression and fear, was a powerful weapon. They would fight not just for survival but for a future where no one could ever again control the course of evolution, the course of life itself. Together they would rise. And the galaxy would never be the same. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.